purposely being delinquent, then you can force him to pay, and all legal means can be taken in order to get the person to pay. The second scenario is the debtor actually is in financial distress. So here it is a bit less straightforward in the sense of the treatment of this type of debtors, okay? Because they don't have the means to pay. So how would you deal with this type of debtors? So there are a few guides from the Quran as well as from the Hadith. One of the guides in the Quran is Surah Al-Baqarah. Basically it says if the debtor is in financial distress, the creditor should give extension of time, give more time. The verse says وَإِنْ كَانَ ذُو أُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. If the debtor is in hardship, then you should give extension of time until he becomes better, okay? When his financial position becomes better. So you give extension of time so that he can improve, so that his financial position would be better and he can start to pay his obligation. Okay? So that is the first option, to give extension of time. The second option is to release or reduce the debt, if possible. Okay, let's say the creditor is wealthy, is people of means, they can afford to release the debt or reduce the debt on the debtor. That is better. وَأَن تَصَدَّقُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. If you become charitable by releasing or reducing the debt, it is better for you. But of course, we're talking about financial institutions. They're actually having a debt involving their shareholders' money or their depositors' money. So in general, the Islamic financial institution cannot afford to release their debtor from the debt obligation. To some extent, I think they can reduce the amount of debt, particularly on the profit portion, perhaps. Okay, that is another option. The next guide with regards to this type of default by debtor in financial distress, there should not be any extra charge for extension of time. Okay, I've mentioned under the first guide, you should give extension of time because the person is in hardship. Now, most of the time, the financial institution would say, can we charge something for that? Okay, because that is the conventional mindset. Each time passing is money. Okay, so whenever there's extension of time, they are thinking about charging extra. So the guide under Sharia is no extra charge just for the extension of time. No, you cannot charge just for the extension of time, because under Islamic principle, time is neutral. It can give you benefit, it can also cause you losses. So you cannot just charge because of the passage of time. Okay? So the verse says, فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. You can only take your capital amount, your principal sum, so that you are not causing injustice to the debtor, and you also is not being victimized by the debtor. You're getting back your principal amount. You cannot charge anything over and above the principal amount. Okay? So that's the third scenario, or that's the third guide. The rest, basically, can the creditor recover legal and recovery costs from the defaulting debtor? Let's say they have to engage lawyers, they have to pay for court fees, for example, or other things, actual out-of-pocket costs due to the default. Yes, this can be reimbursed from the defaulting debtor. If there is any collateral taken from the debtor, the collateral can be liquidated, can be sold in order to recover the debt. Okay, so if any charge, you can have foreclosure and sale of the asset and recover the amount of debt. The creditor also can accelerate outstanding debt upon default if provided in the agreement. Most BBA involve like say 20 years, 15 years. So if the default occur on the second year, you can actually accelerate all the payment for the 20 years or 15 years. And of course now in Malaysia subject to IBROC as may be imposed by the central bank. Okay. And the last point there is basically asset tracing would be allowed if any. For example, if the financing involved the sale of assets, okay, sale of assets, it's a murabaha financing, for example, and the asset, let's say, is certain machines. Okay, so when the buyer or the customer, which the debtor, failed to pay, and the asset is still intact, so you can actually recover the price from the sale of that asset. Okay, you can take back the asset and sell it and recover the debt. So in that sense, the creditor who was before the seller can take priority over the other creditors of that debtor in that situation with regards to that particular asset which is involved in the murabaha or in the baik di taman ajal, for example. Okay, so these are some of the guide with regards to debtor in financial distress, and this guide are generally adapted from Sharia Standard number 3 in the IIUM Sharia Standard 2010. Now, having looked at these two scenarios, I just want to highlight that sometimes when we're talking about default, if you're talking about individual customers, then it will be easier to identify whether they are in the first category or in the second category, whether they are actually not in financial distress or whether they are in financial distress. It may be easier to identify by looking at their assets, whatever they have. But sometimes when we look at corporations and companies, the line that differentiates between a company not in financial distress and the company in financial distress may be a bit vague, because sometimes the company has all the assets but do not have available cash flow to meet the payment under the contract. Okay, so can you categorize this company as mu'sir or the financial distress or hardship as mentioned in the Quran? Okay, so this is another difficulty, because I think in Arabic this is termed as the difference between at-ta'athur and al-i'sar. Okay, financial hardship and cash flow problems. Yeah, cash flow problem, it doesn't mean that you are actually destitute or very having a lot of financial problem. No, you have all the assets, but you don't have cash flow at the time to meet the obligation. So this is another issue. How would you classify some of those corporations facing near default, whether they are actually under the first category where they can be forced to pay, or they are under the second category where extension of time can be given, okay, or should be given. Okay, so this is one thing that perhaps for the audience to think about, because although the verse talk about two scenarios, but sometimes we have the in-betweens, especially with regards to corporations. Okay, now when we look at the contemporary Sharia rulings on the issue of default and late payment of debts, it is clear cut that if you were to charge an extra amount on the debtor because of the delay or because of the extension of time for payment, that is generally regarded as riba, which is being prohibited. Okay, so if you look at the ruling by Fiqh Academy of Rabiah al-Islami, it was mentioned in its 11th meeting in 1989 that when the creditor put a condition on the debtor to pay an amount of money as a specific financial penalty or a specific rate, if he, that is the debtor, is late in paying at the agreed time, the condition is invalid and not enforceable. In fact, it is not permissible, because this is exactly riba al-jahiliyah that the Quran prohibits. So basically, you put a condition, we extend the time, and you have to pay extra, that is clear-cut prohibited. Similarly, in Fiqh Academy OIC's ruling in relation to baik bitaksir in 1990, it says that if the buyer or debtor is late in paying the installments at a specified time, it is not permissible to impose on him any addition to the debt, whether based on a precondition or without a precondition, because that is a prohibited riba. Okay, and in Nadwa al-Barakah, they also have a fatwa which says that it is not permissible to implement penalty on delay in paying qard hasan. Okay, so essentially you cannot charge extra when you extend the time of payment of the debt. However, we have seen actually a ruling by the Sharia Advisory Council of the Central Bank allowing what they term as gharamah and ta'wid. Okay, so in general we have seen you cannot charge extra because that is riba. So that is understood and agreed. But our SAC at the Central Bank has allowed for two things, ta'wid and gharamah. I will explain about this. I will just explain to you first on the ruling that they have actually made, which has been compiled in their latest compilation of resolution. And this ruling actually is a compilation of a number of rulings, the one from 1995, 2010, as well as January 2010 and May 2010. So the summary of it is basically the SAC of Central Bank allow the imposition of late payment charge by Islamic financial institutions involving the two concepts of gharamah and ta'wid. So this is permissible, subject to the following. So basically, based on this ruling, you can only charge two things, either gharamah or ta'wid. So what are they? Okay, because if you look at let's say 1983 up to 1990, early 1990s, Bank Islam have been there in operation. If there is a delay in the payment, they didn't charge anything. Okay, and other banks around the world also did the same. Okay, but they face moral hazard because their customers know that this Islamic bank is not charging anything for the delay, so there is a tendency for them to delay. Okay, so in order to avoid or prevent those or to deter those kind of intentional delay on the part of their customers, these things have come up. Okay, the issue of gharamah and the issue of ta'wid. So I will go on ta'wid first. Okay, the meaning of ta'wid is compensation. Compensation. So the whole idea behind ta'wid is to compensate the creditor for actual loss that the creditor suffered due to the delay. Okay. So the arguments by the banks is they have to send letter of reminder to their customer. They have to record the delay in their books. So there are a number of things that they have to incur as a result of the delay. So this is called ta'wid, compensation for actual loss. Okay. So if you look at the third point, the proviso given by the Central Bank